All right, good morning, everyone. I'm John Campbell. This is the meeting of the Tenant Services Committee. We're at City Hall today, and we have a number of deputants. We have deputants planned on items 5, 6, 7, 7B, and 7C. And right now we have two directors on, and I'll just ask one of them to make a motion to approve the public agenda. Debbie, could you make a motion? Thank you. Debbie, okay. All in favor? Thank you. Oh, and Ziva's there too. Hi, Ziva. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Okay, seeing none. Good morning, Uba. And I need a motion to approve the meeting minutes of October the 5th, 2023. Motion by someone that attended that meeting. Okay, Uba, thank you. All in favor? Right. And then we have, there are a number of items of record. What do we call them, Dara? The business arising notes, and we have a deputant planned for the staff access to TCHC digital video. And Catherine Wilkinson wanted to make a deputation on that. And that is the note found on page 21 of your agenda. Is Catherine here? Do we have Catherine online? She's online? Okay. There's Catherine. Good morning, Catherine. Catherine, you're always welcome to come down here to City Hall so we can see you in person, if you ever want to make the trek. You used to go to, 931 Yonge.
Yes, thank you. And one day I might surprise you.
Okay, so...
Sorry, was the agenda approved? Am I up to debut now?
Yeah, the agenda was approved, and now we're on the briefing note in regard to public access or the staff access to TCHC digital video surveillance systems. Okay,
terrific. Good morning, everyone. As you noted, Chair Campbell, there are several briefing note documents under the action item list. But what I wanted to bring to your attention is they're not actually listed on the agenda. So when you print the agenda, you have no idea there's 5 more reports being presented at today's committee. And I have mentioned this before, and I'm really asking if in the future, when there's these briefing notes under action items, can you please list them on the agenda for transparency? People go back historically and look at the agenda, they're not listed. So that would be helpful, and I've asked before, but I do hope it would be the last time I have to ask staff to consider that. So with regards to CCTV access, this is great news for Toronto Community Housing, for our staff, and for our tenants. And after further collaboration, it has been confirmed that Toronto Community Housing is able to reinstate CCTV access to superintendents, and this is a necessary tool in performing their duties. While this operations removed access to CCTV footage, I don't think they really factored in how this decision would impact frontline staff and tenants. So this resulted in pushback from both tenants and staff, additional meetings, and having to justify why CCTV access was critical to their work. So now 2 years later, we are reversing that decision. That's 2 years of community incidents that have gone unchecked, probably for the most part, loss of revenue to pursue incidents, and increased costs where incidents impacted Toronto Community Housing. It was not so much the system that was broken, it was compliance with the CCTV policy and procedures. So I hope I'm wrong, but the report suggests it will now take another year to revise this policy. It does not commit to a timeline when CCTV access to site staff will be restored. So my recommendation is that this be done immediately. Send an email, remind your staff of their responsibility to comply with the existing CCTV policy, and let them know it's currently under review. Now, I also wanted to point out that when the original briefing note was presented to the Tenant Services Committee on this item, it also included an update on the fob access, where it was proposed by operations that programming of fobs would be removed from site staff and that it would be centralized at the CSU. And management advised at the time the program was on hold pending further discussion with labor partners. So currently programming of fobs remains with site staff, but there is some uncertainty as to whether or not this will be permanent or at some point it will be subject to change. And of note, that report was initially presented to the BIFAC committee through an audit and did not come through the Tenant Services Committee. So I will remind you again, we must really have a tenant lens on reports presented to BIFAC and governance, where they have a direct or indirect impact on our tenants. They should also be presented at the Tenant Services Committee. So again, fix the fob access policy and procedures, improve your internal controls, retrain your staff, send quarterly reminders to verify all existing fobs and report cancellations. And my recommendation is to do whatever it takes to ensure Toronto Community Housing is in compliance, but do not punish the tenants who depend on site staff for this tenant-facing service every single day in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Are there any questions of the deputant? Okay, seeing none, thank you. We have the next deputant is Anne Marie Tomlinson. Is Anne Marie on the line? Okay.
Yes, I'm on the line. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone that's, good morning, Chair. Everyone that's at City Hall online. My camera does not seem to be working well today. I'm not quite sure if everyone can see me. Can everyone see me?
We cannot.
No. Okay. So to begin, first of all, Toronto Community Housing, like I would always say, amazing staff. The policy for transfer is definitely hard and difficult for some tenants who fall into the crisis mode that they have to wait such a long period of time to get the transfers in, whether it is a special need, a crisis, priority, accessibility, accommodation, overhouse or underhouse. If we can revise those policies and procedures, would be a great help. When we come to the human rights piece of tenants and in regards to transfer, there's so many tenants that are suffering in regards to their breach of their rights. I would love to know how we can look on these policies and make them more transparent, how Toronto Community Housing can have a firm grip on those policies to identify these issues and situations that are occurring. There are managers, assistant managers that are a part of this process that is challenging for tenants when it comes to just fairness and unbiasedness and just the truth of the process and procedures that accusations are being laid on tenants. I would ask City Hall and of course the board to revise some of Toronto Community Housing policies, because some of them are outdated. And they really need to be brought up to the standard of today's living and issues and situations that are occurring right now in terms of tenants and what we're going through and what we have to face on a daily basis. So if these policies can be looked upon, recommendations be added, and it wouldn't be difficult to just do subsections, amend subsections, void certain sections just to make those policy sections go a little bit quicker, because I understand that it is a time thing. Nothing happens immediately. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to tenants' rights being infringed upon, that needs to be looked upon immediately, because things are happening as we speak now that are definitely unfair to tenants. And we need to make those processes very fair, transparent, and we need to hold staff accountable who are not doing their jobs when it comes to fair processes and procedures. And I would ask Toronto Community Housing and the city to look into these policies, change them. If staff cannot be retrained, please remove them from their positions, because they're causing harm to tenant, and there's no benefit for tenants, because Toronto Community Housing policy says that their mandate is to make sure tenants' lives are enriched, right? To do their best to help, right? Support them in every aspect possible when it comes to the enrichment of their lives. And in some aspects, that's not happening right now. Please take in consideration my opinions and have them reflected on the record. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tomlinson. Are there any questions of the deputant on this item?
John, it's Debbie, if I may.
Yep.
And Marie, thanks to your deputation. Is it the policy or is it the practice and how the policy is rolled out? I'm wondering if it's the delay and the amount of time it takes for the transfer to happen. Are you seeing a larger delay depending on which of the 4 areas that the transfer is occurring under? Because at the beginning you talked about the amount of time it takes for action to happen. So I'm trying to figure out if your deputation is about the need to change the policy, as you ended up speaking about, or is it about practice?
Well, it's both. It's about changing the length of time, because as we know, transfers take a long time to happen when situations arise for a tenant. And it's so important, if any type of situation happens where a tenant needs to be transferred, it needs to happen quickly, right? And when it comes to policy and procedure, yes, that also takes time for that to kick in. So I think that what needs to be done, and I'm not quite sure how long it's been since that policy has been looked over and revamped, but I think what needs to be done is everyone just needs to go in, look at it, see where they can change, amend, and make certain things happen faster than they could. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I just want to direct you to the notes in that's on the public site. That in fact, staff is looking to do a review of the policy in terms of feedback they've received from the ombudsman. So I'm assuming from you would want tenants to have a say here as well, or to at least be included in any new revision that's happening.
Absolutely. I'd love to be a part of that. And yeah, that would be great to have tenants to be a part of that piece, because, we're on the ground floor. These situations are happening to us. So if tenants can be a part of that, that would be amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the members of the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Tomlinson. Any other questions on information contained in the other briefing notes? No? I have a question, Dara. When does an item become a briefing note? As this is like 12-page briefing note. Usually a briefing note is a page or two. How is it determined if it's a briefing note or a report?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. The briefing notes that we include in the meeting materials respond to action items that we capture in the action item list. So what we try and do is, when we are identifying whether there are regular agenda items that need to be considered as part of the meeting agenda, we'll include it as a report. In those cases, it may be that there are specific actions recommended in the report. Where there's a request from the committee or the board for a specific piece of information and that information is provided to the board, we typically take the approach that we include that as an action, as a briefing note that we include with the action item list. So the agenda item is the action item list. Briefing note relates to the action item list.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a motion from a committee member to, oh, sorry, who's got a question? Oh, Ziva, hi, Ziva, sorry. Oh, I see that hand up. Okay, sorry, Ziva. Go right ahead.
Not to worry. Good morning, everyone. I just have a question in regards to Anna Marie's deputation. Because she's saying that transfers are taking quite some time for Tenant. So my question to the board is, what is the average time does Tenant have to wait in order to get transferred?
So through the chair, I will ask our Director of Operational Planning and Program Services, Lindsay Viets, to address that question.
And we're just pulling that data, so apologies to the committee. If you can give us a couple of minutes, I can answer that question for you, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
While we wait for that information, and thank you for asking that, Ziva. John, if I may, what's your timeline in terms of the next steps? It says 2024. I'm just wondering how much time in 2024 before you come back to TSC with the revised policy and processes?
So through the chair, the commitment is to conduct the tenant consultations and the stakeholder review in Q1 of 2024. We only have one TSC in Q1 of 2024, which is February 5th. So we will likely come back April to TSC.
Thanks.
Okay, do we have that information on the average length or duration of a transfer process?
So I don't have it at hand. I apologize to the committee through the chair.
Is it something we track?
It is, absolutely. There's a lot of variation in how long it takes to process a transfer
right.
because of unit size and availability and these kinds of things, but I can absolutely get it to you. Yes,
Okay, maybe you
All
can
right.
provide that information subsequent to the meeting.
absolutely. Apologies again.
And would it be possible to break it down based on the 4 areas so that we know which of the policies is taking the most time to implement?
Yes, we have that. We can break it down that way through the chair.
So can you provide some sort of, what your experience is, just, sort of in rough terms, what your experience is with these transfers?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Chair. So these, as you can imagine, these transfers can be quite challenging. It is absolutely the goal of the crisis transfer team and the accommodation team to expedite transfers as quickly as possible because they are often quite urgent, and that's the purpose of the program. The real limiting factor is how many units we have available, and often the larger unit sizes that households need, and the number of those small units in the portfolio, the small number of those larger units in the portfolio, as well as the location of those units. Particularly when we're considering safety issues, things can be quite limited in terms of where families can move to. So those are some of the challenges that we deal with.
Uba, you have a question.
Yes, good morning. And I agree with what Lindsay said. It's challenging when TCHC can only provide and offer what they have. So I gave this recommendation in the past where I asked if it's possible to merge the crisis transfer with the SPP transfer with the city. So a person who's looking for a transfer from one unsafe area, instead that person to go. And I heard so many different people complaining about that we being transferred from one area that was unsafe to another area. Because a lot of Toronto, as we know, have areas that are within fight. So it brings, it sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes even defeats the whole purpose of transferring people. So I recommend in the past, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, if we can hold some units the same way that we hold units for the revitalization. That's one maybe solution that we can look into. Another thing that we can look into is see if we can merge the two and the two priority, the SPP, which is designed to, it's with access to housing, as we all know, and it's designed to support people who are facing domestic violence and human trafficking. And so that person, if they are allowed, if we merge the two, then people can apply to other housing providers, which will expedite the process. They can be on the wait list with co-ops, private nonprofit, rent supplement, TCHC, the whole, and the whole 9 yards. So that's my two recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from committee members? Okay, yes, Ziva.
Yeah, so while we get that information about the average duration, I just have a question in regards to, what is her name? Catherine Wilkinson, and the CCT footage, having it on site for superintendents. I guess my question is, are the CCT footage, are they recorded or is it just real time? Are they recording people, or is it just they get to see people in live action?
So through the chair, what we're proposing in the current briefing note is to have a 14-day access period, so you can actually go back. So what we're finding with the building staff is oftentimes they need to follow up with an incident that happened over the weekend, for example. I think the example used was sort of garbage or dumping and things like that. So they're actually going to be able to go back in up to 14 days to review the footage. And beyond that, I believe CSU does keep track of the footage, but I will defer to Mona Botani to speak to that question.
Thank you, Nadia.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. What Nadia was saying, that we do, they do have access up to 14 days, and they can see it as live. But anything after that, they'd have to reach out to CSU, and we can provide them with the information they're looking for.
Thank you.
Any further questions? And so I'll just, yes, Councillor Fletcher.
John,
Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to say that this is really one of those things that, I'm sorry, I'm quite sick today, so I sound a little odd. But I think Catherine brought this up quite a while ago, that having taken away the ability of the on-site staff to be able to review the footage, and it was all kinds of reasons why they couldn't have it. So I just want to say this is one of the important things with having deputations and having active tenants. And this has now come back, because I think we all would know it's pretty important for the on-site staff to be able to identify things pretty quickly. And having set up our TAC, and I know that our fantastic tenant board members are on it, that's the kind of thing as well to give advice on, as well as transfers and other things. I think we have a new formation in the Tenant Advisory Committee. And at some point, I'd like to hear how well the Tenant Advisory Committee thinks the Tenant Advisory Committee is working. And Mr. Chair, I'd like that to come to this committee. So that would be an assessment that it's working great, it would work better if X, and some of the issues that they feel are successfully addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got a follow-up question on the video surveillance. Let's say a tenant throws a trash can down a stairwell and it's witnessed and seen, and you know, the superintendent does an investigation and he recognizes that he recognizes the tenant that did that. Is he going to go knock on the tenant's door, or is he going to report it to the CSU? That would be the proper procedure. He's not going to take matters into his own hands, I guess.
So through the chair, thank you for the question. That would typically escalate into a tenancy management process. So we do contact CSU to document it. There's times where the incident is put on file so that we have a running record. Oftentimes with incidents of antisocial behavior or the example you gave, we actually document it and send a letter. And depending on the severity of the incident, it has escalating circumstances and impact on the tenants. Their tenancy.
Okay.
So if it's an egregious offense, for example, we may move to proceed with eviction if it's a significant offense.
The question was more of, you know, with the availability, I mean, I sort of understand why the the access to the video perhaps was taken away, was to protect staff. So now, so that staff wouldn't take matters into their own hand by going and knocking on the door of somebody that maybe, you know, is going to assault them and say, you know, you're crazy, what are you accusing me of? And so the process will be that if they see something, but, and then, or does it depend on the severity of what they see, or that before they go to the CSU? Because we don't really want them taking matters into their own hands.
So through the chair, I think there's different situations where a super may know a family and has the conversation. Oftentimes those are incidents that we don't capture on record, and so what we encourage the team to do is ensure that they're following the procedures and we're going through the tenancy management process, particularly around escalating issues. Because what we often hear is, well, this family always does X, and when we check the file, there's nothing on the file. And so it's important for us to maintain the documentation. So we do support and appreciate that there's customized approaches and responses, and we're not attempting to be punitive, but we have often found that the larger incidents come from smaller ones as well. And so it's important for us to document when we do find an incident, whether we pursue significant repercussions or not. It's important for us to have that information. So the recommendation is for us to document that and go through the tenancy management process wherever possible. But absolutely, there are situations where it's just a conversation. Sometimes it's young children, you know, and the parents aren't aware, and those conversations do happen on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of questions from directors. Marcel?
Yeah, it's just a comment to Councillor Fletcher's comment on the Tenant Advisory Committee. Just two things. One, we're not allowed to vote in those committee meetings.
That's right.
And the second thing is, I'm still not clear if we're allowed to speak at the board level about the committees. So I don't know if we're able to talk about anything that's happened in there. So I'm a little unclear on that part.
Well, I would say that if a topic comes up that was discussed at the Tenant Advisory Committee, you're not prohibited from making reference to what was discussed at the committee. You can just say, you know, at the Tenant Advisory Committee, there was general consensus that, you know, we handle something in a particular way. You can certainly make reference to that.
Yeah, I get that, but I'm not sure if we can, or if that's the part I'm a little confused with.
So if you're on the Tenant Advisory Committee and there's a topic of discussion, nothing's done in private, and you can, if you want to make reference to that in, you know, in any in a TCHC committee or in a TCHC board setting, you can certainly do that. There's no prohibition from doing that. It's part of it's part of the experience you're bringing forward in the discussion. Okay. Do you have another follow-up question, Marcel? No? Okay. Councillor Fletcher?
Maybe we should just get that clearer so you're more comfortable, Marcel, in figuring that out governance-wise, what happened.
Dara, do you want to weigh in?
I'm not finished.
Go ahead.
I'm not finished.
This is not even on topic, but go ahead.
Did you want to shut it down, Mr. Chair?
Well, no, we're on the topic of the briefing notes, but if we want to talk about the tenant service or the Tenant Advisory Committee, we can do that.
Because there might be something around this issue. So I think we should be clear, and the board should be clear, in case tenants have been told that things are confidential, they're not allowed to talk about them. And then also find out what happens in the seniors Tenant Advisory Committee, which has been going longer, smaller, but I would say it was more tenant driven than last time. So maybe we should put Tenant Advisory Committee on the agenda for one of the TSC meetings so we can understand that and how it's operating, et cetera, et cetera. How about that, Mr. Chair?
Okay,
I'd ask that. I'll move that.
That sounds...
Second, the CCTV access, when will the staff have access at the site to CCTV?
So through the chair, I'll turn that question over to Mona.
No, well, I'm asking you. I don't believe that. I think Go ahead.
So through the chair,
Go
my
ahead.
understanding is
Turn
we're
everything
looking
to
to
the CSU.
put the policies in place in Q1 of 2024. My assumption is that the staff having access will align with that, but I just wanted to confirm with the staff that are closer to the file.
Well, I want to be clear what the corporation's position is, and you are the acting COO. So that is the corporation's position, not anybody's.
So through the chair, barring any unforeseen circumstances, I'm comfortable in suggesting that we will have that in place for Q1 of 2024. The deputant did refer to a one-year timeline. That isn't a timeline that I'm comfortable with, and so I will work with the staff to ensure that it's back in place for Q1 of 2024.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I want to mention something that troubles me quite a bit, and it's what I think we've slipped into at TCHC. And when Ms. Gouveia talked about that's a tenancy management issue, and that will be sent to the CSU. My understanding, and I think we should have this clear, and I'd like to have this very clear. A tenancy management issue of somebody doing something with their garbage in an antisocial behavior way should be escalated not to the CSU, but through up to the assistant deputy manager or the general manager. That's a tenancy management issue. So now you've opened up a can of worms for me about who's doing tenancy management, because I don't believe it's the CSU. And you know me, I'm never letting this go now.
So through the chair, I'm happy to comment on that.
Really, really clear. Yeah, no, we're going to do more than comment, but I'd like to hear your comment. Yeah.
So I apologize if I misspoke. It's not to suggest that CSU does any tenancy management. We have our tenant services coordinator who report up to the manager of tenancy management and ultimately to the GM, and that's where we conduct tenancy management. What CSU actually documents is at a unit level if there's escalating antisocial behavior or areas of potential criminal or mischief intent, and so we usually document it. We have a system particularly around violent activities that CSU maintains that allows us to maintain a health and safety lens in terms of working with particular tenant units. And so those are the items that work through CSU. Tenancy management remains under the regions and through the tenancy management pillar. They're the ones who write the letters to the tenants, and they're the ones who keep the file. And so if there is an escalation to a potential eviction, for example, it absolutely goes through the tenancy management pillar. So I apologize if I misspoke.
Thank you for that clarification, but I'm still unclear, because somewhere in there, difficult tenants, ones that even have somebody's in charge of the tenancies. It's not the CSU. It's the tenancy management folks, which ultimately is the general manager or yourself.
So absolutely, we manage the tenancy through the tenancy management. CSU is brought in if there's any items that relate to CTV retrieval beyond 14 days, any issues that potentially will result in a criminal investigation. If they're a noise complaint where there's CSU documentation on file, they're not brought into every case where we escalate a tenancy management issue. So I can clarify that in a future report if needed in terms of when they intersect with the process.
I want to be clear that CSU reports on noise complaints would go to the general manager, because I think that there's an issue about who's in charge in our sites. I think there's a big issue. I'm noticing, Marcel, you're nodding. Is it the CSU or is it the general manager in that team?
So through the chair.
And I'm just speaking my mind, because I've watched this back and forth, that everybody wants to be it. CSU wants to be the one, and that's why we're having this review, because a noise complaint, yes, gets called in, it gets logged, but unless it's a gun complaint, which I think the police should also be involved in, then I'm just unclear why every time we talk about things with our tenants, we're turning everything over to the CSU, rather than a very hard-ass tenancy management, which I've witnessed and been part of, to bring a community into compliance, which is very easy to do because those people are there all the time. So I'm seeing that there's a lot of hears and nodding in this. So this is a conversation that I don't even know, maybe should be, I feel like we go around in circles on this, Ms. Gouveia, and I want to be really clear what those lines are, because I think they're very blurred, in my opinion, from what I've been watching. Maybe they're not, and it's just my mistake.
So through the chair, I'm happy to bring back a report that formally outlines the current communication lines and where the intersection points are. As you can appreciate, a lot of our noise complaints also come through the CSU dispatch as well. So there are situations where there are overlap and iterative in terms of the two divisions speaking to each other. Having said that, I think if we have a clearly mapped out process with committee input, I think that would be helpful to us. So happy to bring that back in a future report.
You don't have that at the moment?
Not available to me. Like I don't have a chart, and I'd like us
Okay.
to be able to walk through the process
yeah.
very clearly.
I don't want to wait for another meeting. I'd like that to be an outcome of this meeting, Mr. Chair, that we would ask for that. Please, thank you. Then have it sent out so we could look at it or be part of the CSU review. Because
Yeah, and
I have
John,
not had it.
And John, if I may, Nadia, it would be great if you can include how any sort of clarification of processes communicated to tenants, please. I think the concern and why you see so many nodding heads is because we are concerned around CSU acting like the police, and we're even more concerned when we hear that behavior that's antisocial is being criminalized by bringing in CSU when it should be through a tenant approach.
And to be really clear, Mr. Chair, who is in charge? That's really my point. Who's in charge once there's a difficulty with a tenant? Who?
Right, and so staff has given an indication that they'll come back with a report that indicates how matters flow once a complaint comes in or once a call is made. Obviously, if a noise complaint, I mean, the CSU is created to serve tenants. And it's often, and the CSU is largely responding to tenant calls. And if a call comes in, on a weekend, in the evening about a noise complaint, the CSU is going to respond. They're not going to flip it over to the general manager. So Nadia and staff have made can provide some clarity as to what the current process is so that there's a clear understanding. Okay.
I've got that, and I appreciate what you've said. Yes, it would obviously go to the CSU, it would get called in, it goes in the file, but at some point, somebody's dealing with that tenant.
Right.
Who?
Well,
it's not the CSU.
So as much as
my understanding,
we can debate. I think we'll leave this debate for another time. Staff is going to bring Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher, the staff has given an indication that they'll come back with a report that indicates how lines of communication work when there's an involvement of the CSU.
I will state that I happen to know of times when CSU officers are overriding the folks on the ground about what the response should be. They're deciding what should happen with the tenant. So that's why I want to have this clear.
Okay. All right. We'll do that.
Everybody here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us are very clear and very tight and very clued in with tenants. And yourself and Ms. Douglas, Debbie Douglas, you're not as on the ground, but there's 4 of us here that kind of hear things all the time and know quite a bit. So I think that's why this is a good discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So staff will do that. Okay. It should be fairly straightforward.
So through the chair, I think we will aim to come to the February 5th. I can actually bring a general manager as well, and we can walk through the process together. And if there are efficiencies and opportunities, they're happy to discuss with the committee.
It'll be a great discussion. Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Can we have a motion to receive the briefing notes and for the business arising items? Moved by Debbie, seconded by Ziva. Thank you very much. All in favor? Okay. So now we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equities Work Plan. And we have a deputation from Ms. Tomlinson.
Good morning again, everyone. I think that the OCHE, it's a good part of Camrona community housing. I would love to see a section like that overhauled on the complaints process of Toronto community housing. Because as it stands right now, there's no proper process and procedure in regard to the complaints process. Everybody's just doing whatever they want to do, saying whatever they want to say. And, you know, we have these God complexes going on, intimidating, threatening tenants. And if a body such as this was on the complaints process of Toronto community housing when tenants are complaining, whether it's about staff or whatever the issue is, we would have a more smoother, more transparent, more active process going on that tenants could understand where is it, who is actually taking part. And it has to be a specific person. It can't be Peter, John, Bob, and Susan that is doing the complaint process. And then Peter, John, Bob, and Susan has their own opinions. It keeps going on. Even when it comes to an end, they still manage to continue the process with tenants, which is absolutely unfair, right? So that process, I'm telling you, City Hall, that process needs to be overhauled ASAP from the ground to the top, putting in proper processes and procedure. Who's in charge?
So,
what does it go to the next level?
So Anne Marie, we have the tenant complaints process is coming up on the agenda. This item is in regard to the.
I'm a part of that.
Okay, so this is in regard to the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity, which is.
Yes, and I'm saying that this piece is a good part to put onto that process.
Right.
If we can have a process in place such as that for the complaint process, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Fletcher? Sorry, your microphone is not on.
Just wanted to bring Anne Marie up to date that the Commissioner of Housing Equity and any other officer in TCHC would be quite different. The Commissioner of Housing Equity was put in place simply because there were people, someone was evicted and then died because they didn't have somewhere to live. So this has to do with arrears, etc. So this is the way that people aren't evicted for arrears. It's a very particular focus for the Commissioner of Housing Equity. There is the Ombudsman's Office, which is definitely there if there are trends and patterns around complaints. It's available to anybody at any time. So I thought I would just bring you up to date on that one.
Thank you. Okay, and on the item, we have the commissioner here, and just wondering if you could give us just a few high-level remarks about your plan for 2024.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I apologize, I have a scratchy voice right now. I've been sick, so. So as you know, in 2022, the OCH's mandate expanded to include all TCHC's tenants, which resulted in significant changes to the flow of referral to the OCH. Given this, the OCH spent the majority of 2023 working with TCHC to implement strategies to manage the flow of referrals and evaluating our case management practices. In 2024, we plan to stay the course with respect to delivering meaningful, appropriate, and helpful support to TCHC with respect to eviction prevention for arrears of rent, and we have set out 4 goals in our work plan to accomplish this. The first goal of ensuring successful tenancies and eviction prevention is the core work of OCH. For 2024, the notable change to our work plan from previous years is the implementation of the large arrears balance pilot. Also significant for 2024 will be the rollout of the new arrears collection process, and this will involve training staff in collaboration with TCHC and tracking new arrears separately from arrears which began to accumulate prior to the new ACP. Goal 2 is related to staff training and capacity building, and we will continue to deliver training aimed at assisting frontline staff to be more successful in addressing arrears of rents with tenants, and avoid the need for an OCH referral in as many cases as possible. Goal 3 outlines the reports we will submit through both boards of directors, and Goal 4 relates to systemic improvements and upgrades that will create efficiencies for both the OCH and TCHC. I've not described every detail within the plan because I know you have it in front of you, but those are just the high-level description of all 4 goals for the work plan. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Are there any questions of the commissioner? Councillor Fletcher?
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just note that, no, I will note that since I deal with a lot of tenant issues, that nobody else has an OACH to redo their out there. They're just getting evicted for arrears, whereas we have this process. So I think we should be very happy that we have it. I think tenants need to be understand that it's a special thing that TCHC has, and if you know tenants in the private real estate, that they have no rights whatsoever. They're at the landlord-tenant board. So when you get to the landlord-tenant board at Toronto Community Housing, it's because everything's been done except. And Marcel, you know that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Ziva?
So I have a question in regards to arrears. So if tenants are backed up with paying for their rent, is there a threshold or a cutoff? Is it like if they missed, 5 payments for their rent that, you have a conversation that they're in arrears? Like, how does that conversation look like? And then when you do talk about training, what types of training are you all thinking about to help support staff on the ground?
Thank you. So through the chair, I'll start with the first one, which is you asked about the process and how arrears kind of work. So there is TCHC has its own arrears collection process, and if a tenant gets behind by the second month of arrears, they should be, an N4 should have been served, staff should have tried to work with that tenant, and then it would trigger a referral to the OACH. So then when the file comes to our office, we work with the tenant to try to resolve the matter within 45 days. So we reach out to the tenant and do intensive case management to try to get them back on track and broker either repayment agreements or get direct payments or get the arrears paid down. So that's really a high, quick level overview of the process. And then
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And with
On the training.
the training, yeah. So with regards to the training, so what we've started doing this year is we've started doing case conferencing. So it's an open forum where TCHC frontline staff can come and meet with an early resolution officer by region, and they can ask questions. So what we find is it's a lot of questions on OACH processes as well as the arrears collection process. So it's it's available to them to come with the hopes that they'll not need to refer the file to the OACH, that they'll be able to resolve the matter on their own. We've also, through these case conferences, been compiling data all year to help inform next year's training. So we've got topics that are similar across regions, so we'll be meeting with TCHC to go through those in the new year and determine what best to target when for staff.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify with you. So it's 2 months back payments, and then they receive an N4, and then within 45 days, their client care coordinator would help them with creating a plan to pay off their debt.
So through the chair, maybe I can assist with this question. So our tenant service coordinators are working throughout the month, and so we're able to identify within, not necessarily 2 months, but certainly within the month, whether a tenant is falling behind. We try to be as proactive as possible because we recognize that the more a tenant falls behind, the tougher it is to get out. So typically it ranges anywhere from within the month, just kind of doing a check-in, to the following month when the N4 is issued. The tenant service coordinator then works with that household to try and get them back on track. Oftentimes we're working with the household for a month or two before we actually refer it to OACH. So the goal is to try and resolve the issues as much as possible locally. In instances where we're not able to actually get much traction or get a repayment agreement done locally, that's when you will see referrals up to OACH. So what you may not see is referrals going within the first month to OACH, and oftentimes that's because we're focusing on managing and engaging with the tenant locally.
And in the case where a tenant receives a letter of recalculation of their rent and they have to pay a little bit more, so that means that they're backed up with their payment, how does that work with this plan to help them pay off their rent?
So through the chair, I'll try to answer the question if I'm understanding it correctly. So through the annual rent review process, we establish what the new rent would be based on tenant documentation. And so sometimes that may go up and there's instances where it goes down. So typically with that, we would have that discussion with the tenant. They're advised of their new rental amount for that year, at which point the expectation is that would be the tenant rent paid. The second part of your question in terms of the repayment agreement, that's typically only in place when the tenant enters into arrears. So we wouldn't see a repayment agreement typically at the beginning of the year through an annual review process. It would only be if the tenant falls behind subsequent to the new establishment of the new amount.
Okay, the reason why I brought that up is because I know a lot of tenants have been receiving that throughout the year. That there's like a recalculation of rent, and then they get 6 months at like parts of it gets added on to their monthly rent to compensate for that recalculation. So you're saying that annually they would have to pay, I mean, they have to submit their forms or their information to recalculate rent, and then there's another payment agreement.
So the repayment agreement is typically focused on paying back arrears. So for example, if your rent is currently $100 and we recalculate it in 2024, it's $120, you wouldn't engage with a repayment agreement until you're actually in arrears post actually trying to pay that amount. So we have had instances where the newly set amount, which is typically raised beyond inflation based on a tenant's income or an additional member of the family's income. If the tenant is having difficulty, we look at the annual review documentation to ensure that the rent reflects their current conditions. If they fall into arrears, that's when we would establish a repayment agreement. So they would pay whatever amount the rent is. The expectation is they're paying the appropriate amount, and then a repayment agreement would be subsequent to the rental fee due that month.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Uba. And this is
Thank
on,
you.
is this on the general workings of the Office of the Commissioner, or is this on the work plan for 2024?
Pardon?
Sorry, are you just asking for clarification on the work plan or the OCH in general?
No. I was just a follow-up question, what Ziva asked, which is the note of assessment. And Nadia mentioned this. And I've seen a lot of different tenants who said, last year I was making that much money. TCHC is based in my rent. Last year's note of assessment. Now I'm making way less, and I understand we do the rent check or rent adjustment if it's 20% less or 20% more that they're making. But a lot of people are saying I shouldn't be paying based on what I was making last year when I'm making half of that now. So how do we remedy that? Like, how do we support that in that cases?
So through the chair, I will turn that question to our Director of Operational Planning and Program Services, Lindsay Viets.
Thanks for the question. Through the chair, that is a situation that happens with some frequency, and tenants, as part of the process, they can request a reassessment in the current year, where we would go in and look at their current income and reassess based on that.
There were, and I know we're talking about here in general, but there were tenants who did that and still didn't get the support that they need. So maybe I can talk to someone offline later on. I don't know, but a lot of people are saying our rent is based on last year. Even though we sat down with somebody, even though we said we're gonna provide 8 or whatever 6 or 8 and pay stubs, still my rent is based on last year. And I hope something can be done that, because a lot of people are really, really frustrated and need the support.
So if I could just follow up on that question. So if a tenant loses their job or one of the jobs that they have, or they lose a contract, are you saying that they can go approach staff and get an immediate adjustment in their rent?
They can request a reassessment. They provide the documentation, and staff will take a look and reassess their rent. Yes,
Right,
there are nuances. Sorry, there are nuances to it. So
Right.
Depends on the specific
Because
situation.
obviously, if they lose their job, they've lost money immediately, right? And they don't want to necessarily still be subject to the same rent as before. Okay. Marcel.
John,
Oh, sorry, Debbie. Debbie, go ahead. Sorry, Marcel. Debbie first. Sorry.
Sorry, Marcel. This is just a general question. We've been having a conversation around forgiving or writing off arrears. Where are we in that conversation, Nadia?
I'll put that over to maybe Melanie can answer that, or is that for you, Nadia?
I thought that was probably an option.
Okay, Nadia.
Start, and then I can pass it over to Melanie. So through the chair, we are working with OACH as well as the service manager to look at a proposal to submit either to the committee or to the board in terms of what the criteria would be to actually do that. So we're working on the data analysis, but also very clear criteria so that we can present it to the board for your approval before proceeding, because it has implications financially as well. So we're working with our CFOs and the larger team before we bring that proposal back to the board.
That would be good. I'm sure one of the concerns is about a pull factor so that you don't forgive and then everybody stops paying their rent. Not that I think that will happen. So I'm assuming that will be part of the conversation you'll bring to the board in terms of how do you mitigate that?
Through the chair, absolutely. And part of the discussion is, should it be focused just on the period during COVID, recognizing that we had particular anomalies during those 2 years, and whether that would be the focus, or whether we look at a longer term strategy moving forward so that it would be applied year over year. And so I think we're probably closer to the former than the latter in terms of looking at a COVID relief strategy, but we will get back to you. Do we have a timeline? I'll have Lindsay speak to the timeline on when we're bringing it back.
Okay, and I would strongly recommend that we start off with the forgiveness for the COVID period, but you also bring for a go-forward strategy as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, Marcel.
Yeah. Okay. I just have a question as far as like, so I'm working, everything. I lose part of my hours in one job, or I lose my job, and it starts like I can no longer really afford the rent that is based on my last year's income, and so I contact the office and I say, listen, I lost my job, I don't have the income that I had, and what is the wait time for someone to actually get back to me to let me know that we're going to do a recalculation, or does the office send a letter saying, you know, we received a request and we're going to be like setting up an appointment with you? Because like the last thing personally I want to deal with, if I was in that situation, is the threat of like getting a letter saying that, you know, like you owe this much rent, you're in arrears. Like I no doubt would have enough grief and aggravation, and I don't think I would really want to do that again, you know. So that's the one thing I want to just ask is, what would be the wait time?
Leslie, do you have that?
So through the chair, we would work with the tenant as quickly as possible to address that. So as soon as the tenant contacts the office, it could be a couple of days for the staff to get back to them, but we would work with them quickly. We wouldn't ask them to wait a long time, given the situation.
Are you saying generally within 48 hours?
For a response from the office, yes. And then there would be a process of reviewing documentation and discussion with the tenant, but it would be a priority.
Got it. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. So that is the, any other questions of the office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity? Okay, seeing none, motion to approve the work plan. Uba, all in favor? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7. That is the Chief Operating Officer's reports. We have a deputation from Catherine Wilkinson.
Yes, hello again.
Hello again.
There's some good conversations happening this morning. I'm so glad I'm a part of the meeting.
Yeah, well,
So first of all,
we're glad you're here too.
aw. I want to say I really like the new format. Also the way and the language in which it's written. It's very direct and open feedback. And clearly the COO is identifying and owning the challenges that Toronto Community Housing faces and looking at the strategies to address them. And I do want to comment, it's cause for celebration that 2.3 million in arrears were paid back to Toronto Community Housing. There should be champagne. The unmanaged arrears have decreased, and this is an early indication that changes made to the arrears collection process is gaining traction. So congrats to the staff on that. I don't think the board has ever been apprised of the commercial arrears collection process, which would presumably be quite different from the tenant arrears collection process. So at some point, it may be helpful for the committee to know what is the process used to address commercial arrears. The client call center is a lifeline for tenants, and while the pie chart breaks down the top 10 category service requests for the previous quarter, I don't think there's a comparison by category year over year. And this information helps the board to determine if existing programs and strategies that they approve are actually meeting the needs of tenants. So on to community safety. Well, this reports crimes against property or persons. Historically, there was a breakdown indicating the types of calls for service from tenants. I've raised this before. I'm very concerned that we are not having conversations around community safety issues. Beyond the CSAT committee, which has oversight of strategies and policies and focuses primarily on the violence reduction program in high needs communities. You know, it used to, list out the number of noise complaints, the types of calls that tenants call the CSU, broken doors, fobs, barking dog. And a lot of these calls, CSU actually does not respond to. They're considered operational matters and letters get sent. So I think we're missing something at the Tenant Services Committee around following up on community safety issues. I appreciate the inclusion of fire incidents. I've often wondered why there is no reporting on flooding incidents in our communities. They happen frequently. Sometimes a tenant may be at fault. Other times it may be a result of burst pipes or radiators, which can impact multiple units at a time. And this is coming from a tenant who had 5 floods in my previous unit, none of which were my fault. So I want to end on the high note. When we talk about pest management, I'm really pleased to see that Toronto Community Housing is honoring its commitment to refresh the pest management strategy. And given my experience working with Toronto Public Health on the City of Toronto Bedbug Project and regularly advocating for change, one might say, staff have reached out to me to collaborate with them on this important work, and I look forward to working with them. In preliminary discussions, we are very much aligned on what we can do differently going forward. I do believe Toronto Community Housing can be the go-to resource for best pest management practices. Although not inclusive, the refresh will review vendor requirements, new and emerging treatment options, retraining our staff, being proactive by educating tenants on prevention methods, and considering additional tools to support them through treatments. We have our work cut out for us. I appreciate the opportunity to work with staff in undertaking this review. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Are there any questions of the deputant?
I'll just say that Ottawa Housing does have the 5-star pest fighting plan. So you should know that, Catherine, before you start.
Well, can I say that they're about to become second?
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm optimistic.
That'd be so good.
Okay. On all of the information in the reports from the Chief Operating Officer, are there any questions of staff? Okay. I have a question. So it mentions that in partnership with the city's Shelter Support and Housing Administration Division and the Housing Secretariat, TCHC ensures that individuals and families facing homelessness receive necessary assistance to secure stable housing quickly. And we are on track to meet its rapid rehousing target of 450 households housed with 314 units filled. So were all of those people that were housed in rapid rehousing, were all of those people from the wait list? Or were some not from the wait list?
So through the chair, the rapid rehousing program does require the participants to be on the wait list. But it's a separate stream by which they come in with the supports in place. So they're not necessarily they're pulling chronologically, but not necessarily the next person in line for the wait list, because it's a specialized program that we work with the city on.
So individuals facing homelessness, are those people that are homeless or are those people that are facing homelessness? There's a difference, right?
So through the chair, the occupants that come through the rapid rehousing list are typically in the shelter system currently. And so particularly with families, it's an opportunity for us to bring people in with the specialized supports in place. And so it's been a program that allows us to pull people directly from the shelter system, but they come in with the supports, which is necessary.
So they could be in theory quite far down the wait list, but because they are unhoused or homeless, they're given priority.
So through the chair, I'll have Lindsay Viets speak to that in terms of what the criteria is to get through rapid rehousing. I suspect the answer to your question is potentially yes, but I want to clarify in terms of what that criteria is before families are selected.
Through the chair, it is potentially yes is the answer.
Well, and so what I would say is that, I mean, that's the right call, because somebody that's on the wait list may already have an apartment. They may have a flat, right? They may be adequately housed, but they're looking to get into Toronto community housing for any one of a number of reasons.
That's correct.
Right.
Through the chair, and the city manages the selection process into the rapid rehousing program. Right. So they have quite extensive criteria that governs that process.
Right. Okay. Tough call sometimes, I guess, right? Okay. Okay. Any other, I've got a quick few questions. Okay. Ziva, you have a question?
Yeah, so I do have a question in regards to community safety, which is in the report. So it says crime against persons and property showed an increase with reported crimes against persons up by 19 incidents, 6%, and crime against property up to 10, so 2% compared to Q2 of 2022. I guess I'm just trying to find, I would like to get some understanding of like what exactly is going on in the ground. The reason why we're seeing such an increase of people's property either being damaged or people are reporting crimes against each other, like a person. I hope that that makes sense. In my mind it did, but
So through the chair, I'll start, and if Mona from CSU has anything to add, she'll speak to that. I do think there's an opportunity for us to look at the reporting template to look year over year, because there are seasonal trends that impact the numbers. And so, for example, we typically see more activity in the summer months as more people are engaging and they're outside, and so that might be a contributing factor. But I do think the analysis looking year over year will help to give those trending to speak to that issue. But I don't know, Mona, if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, through the chair. So the one thing I can add is that what we've seen post-COVID is that a lot more people are out and about, which has increased the crimes against persons and property, unfortunately. So in addition to the seasonal trends, sorry?
And what is the process for CSU? So say if my property got damaged, what does that process look like? Of me reporting the damage to my property?
Yeah, so if property got damaged, you would report, as a tenant, you would report it, and CSU would come out and, look into what incident took place and document it, and then any repairs that need to be done would be reported through the operations and maintenance, and that would be taken care of that way. And then follow-up would happen if necessary.
Any further questions, Eva?
Not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher?
I just wanted to be clear with something you said, Mr. Chair. People from the wait list aren't already in housing. The wait list is about 50, 60,000 people. They're just waiting for housing. So the different types of wait lists. There's some people that are waiting for a transfer, and that's a different case. So I'm with Rapid Housing. I don't think there's many families going in there. It's singles, and it's people coming out of shelters or off the street, homeless or at risk of being homeless. That's what that program is that I know about, unless it's changed. Thanks.
Thank you. Marcel?
Yeah, okay, I'm looking at the document, and on page 4 of 15, when it has like staff use 107 units, my question is this: where I live at 470 Melita, we used to have a program room that was taken away, and then we were swapped up with the super and maintenance staff's lunchroom. That became our program room, which was less than what we originally had. Now they took that, and we don't have no program. We don't have nothing. Like the thing we have right now is like maybe you can fit 4 people in there comfortably. It's like a closet. But my thing here is, then at 2 Lambert Lodge, I understand that the maintenance staff there took a 3-bedroom unit for their use. So like, how does like that work when staff can just like take things that the community needs and use it for their own use? I got no problem with people having lunch and having some privacy for lunch, but the thing is, like, we have very little as it is as a community. We don't have a place for programming. We don't have nothing here. There's like nothing. We have access to nothing. So, if you're talking about communities that are, like there's rise in like damage and frustration and anger, all these things play a part in it when you keep taking things from people that need those services and those safe spaces. And like, we need those spaces back. Like, to me, I don't see how that is acceptable for someone to just arbitrarily take something and, it's like, forget the community. That's how it's looking like. That's the optics of this.
So through the
What can we do about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So through the chair, happy to comment on that. We're currently conducting an audit and review of every unit that's been taken out of circulation, including units held for staff use, agency use, as well as tenant use. In terms of units that are held for staff use, we have collective bargaining agreement obligations with staff regarding health and safety that requires, depending on the location, for us to potentially take a unit out of circulation. Having said that, in the example that you've given, I'm happy to take it back and review it with the team, just in terms of whether there's an alternative to providing that support to the staff, but also to the tenants. So that's going to be something that we would be deeply interested in the audit. The other piece, in terms of the process, we're not allowed to take a unit out of circulation without approval from the service manager as well. So there's an internal form that's used that includes criteria why the unit's being taken out of circulation, and that needs to be signed off by the service manager before we could actually take a unit out of circulation. So again, I think this is going to be part of the review, and happy to deal with the individual example you've raised as well.
Marcel, any follow-up? Okay, any follow-up?
Okay, so yeah. So you're going to do a review. So how long will that take? And in the meantime, our community, like, we can't do anything. So how long do we have to wait before we can get our stuff back? Because basically it just got taken, and that ain't right.
So,
Thanks.
Director Charlebois, I'm happy to follow up with you directly on this specific example. The review has commenced, and so we're starting to look at the units individual. We did that with the vacancy process, and we found it to be very fruitful in terms of the feedback. And so we have already initiated the process to go unit by unit and have a manager physically go on site and get clarity in terms of use. But in terms of the example you brought, I'm happy to follow up with you directly on that.
Anything further, Marcel?
Yeah, so if you're gonna take units out for staff out of circulation, then it makes sense that maybe you can take, instead of taking that unit, putting it back into circulation, maybe taking that unit and giving it to a community so that they can run some decent programming. That's my thoughts on that, because we have nothing. Like, honestly, we have nothing. Thank you.
So through the chair, again, Director Charlebois, happy to follow up with you directly, but there are units, and we absolutely have multiple precedents in communities that require programming space where we've taken units out of circulation to provide that. So we can explore options for the specific site you're referencing.
Councillor Fletcher?
Oh, no, I have a question about that. Sorry. Is there no, basically, are you saying that the staff couldn't have their lunch in the programming room?
So through the chair, what I'm saying, there are collective bargaining agreement obligations that require us to have dedicated staff space and allow them for storage of property, as well with the 416. And I wouldn't speak to specifics. I don't know if Ms. Schulman is able to speak to that, but generally speaking, there are 416 obligations that require access to a shower on site, for example, given the nature of the work and unit entries and things like that. So there are spaces within our buildings where we are required to provide certain access to facilities that the program and common areas would not provide.
And is there no office there that basically would have some of those things there?
So typically, if we're taking a unit out of circulation, is because we wouldn't have a common office space that provides that. If in the example given, there is an office space that has access to those amenities, there's no reason why we couldn't look at repurposing that space. So that's why I would have to follow up on the individual example.
So not only tenants have a good deal in TCHC, staff has a really good deal too. But the other thing I wanted to say was, while earlier we talked about having, what are those things called, containers. You may remember, and Ziva might not know this, but we had somebody come talking about programming at Lawrence Heights, and we talked about getting containers on site, because that way there are a lot of people use them, and I think it's something, given what's going on, that we should be going site by site, possibly using those if there's space on site. Like in Marcel's case, I don't know if there's any space, but everybody knows that's programming location, etc., or a trailer for showers or anything else. So we need to kind of solve this. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Marcel, your hand is up. Another question?
Yeah, okay, so if you're gonna look at units or locations that don't have program space, 470 Melita doesn't have program space, and 2 Lambert Lodge doesn't have program space. Those things are could be very vital. Well, they are vital to this community. Like, we try to do things, but sometimes we have to do things outside of TCHC to actually have something decent and tangible for the community. So if we could get one of these units that, that's taken out of circulation in this location here at 470 Melita and 2 Lambert Lodge, that'd be great. And just a heads up, you can't really shower that great at 470 Melita, or hot water's not that great.
Okay, thank you. The Chief Operating Officer said that she'd get back to you directly in regard to that particular matter at 470 Melita, so we expect that she'll do that. Are any more questions on the reports that were put forward? Okay, none. A motion to receive the reports, please, from one of the committee members. Moved by Debbie, all in favor? Thank you. Next item up is the tenants' complaints update, 7B. And we have a deputation from Anne Marie Tomlinson.
Yes, I'd like to ask a quick question before my 5 minutes starts. Can deputants ask questions to any other things that are happening?
No, the process, Anne Marie, is that on the agenda item, you speak to the agenda item, and you can raise questions, but you can't question staff. Then it's up to members of the committee if they would like to follow up on your deputation and ask specific questions of staff. So the deputation is an opportunity for you to present your viewpoint on the agenda item and to make a recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yes, so just if my comments on the background, how is the complaint process transferred over to the solutions team if the situations from the complaint process has not been rectified? If we can get some information on how that is done for tenants, that would be great, because as it stands now, it's unclear on how we get from one complaint process to the next complaint process. Would be interesting to know how that can happen for us. Additionally, when we're talking about complaints and the data on complaints, can we have some information, I don't know, maybe in a newsletter in regards to how the complaint process is being done in regards to results from the main process, right? How much percentage is completed successfully without being transferred to the resolutions team? Our tenants would love to know that, because right as it stands right now, we're a little unclear, a lot of our tenants, because in the West End, I get asked this question a lot.
Oops.
How can we get some information in regards to getting to that clarity?
Hi.
And
Really
is
sick. Yeah.
and who is responsible for getting that process done? And if it's a one direct person that when you start the complaint process, okay, you start with a person, and then a person may bring in other individuals into the complaint process if they need help. Who would those individual persons be? Are they specially trained in regard to those processes and procedures to help that process be successful? I would love to know that. And then if the process is not successfully completed, is there some type of recommendation why it wasn't? And then the reasons that, okay, because it wasn't successfully completed, then we may need to transfer it up to solutions. Some clarification on these things as soon as possible would be good, because as it stands right now, there's no real clear process in regards to that piece. As it says on the last sheet on 7B, to improve information sharing against client care staff, feedback was gathered to estimate an efficient way to document information from callers and vendors. So when we're talking, I do know the new system that they do have in place has an option where tenants can give information into complaints or whatever the issue they're having. But does that process have any safeguards in protecting complaints? Can managers, assistant managers go into that system, close a ticket without a complaints process being, because tenants are complaining about this, go into the system, the ticket system, and close out a complaint without that process being properly done when it comes to a tenant? And if there's no safeguards in regards to that, because there needs to be safeguards in regards to that, and if there isn't, can it be implemented? Can some type of software be implemented to safeguard complaints until the process is completed? That would be great if we can have some feedback or some type of implementation when, how that, what would that look like in the near future? And at the bottom of page 7B, engagement initiatives, the solutions team collaborate with communications team to improve the social media strategy. That most tenants, again, I would just say to that, most tenants really need to get information from another source that don't have access to social media, or we don't have smartphones. Some of us are still using just plain phones that can't connect. So there's important information that I've learned from coming to these meetings, and I wouldn't have known them if I hadn't come to this meeting. So I would love for the information to be
20
freely
seconds,
gathered.
Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there questions of the deputant from committee members? Okay, no, seeing. Anne-Marie, I know you submitted a written deputation as well in regard to this item. It would be great. You had a whole raft of good questions there, and it would be great if we could schedule a time when you could speak with someone on staff to get answers to all of those questions. That's probably the best way to do it, rather than you writing them out and them writing you back, which takes a lot of time. Be great if you could just if we could have somebody have just a phone call with you or a meeting with you, and just to outline the entire process. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That would be amazing.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your deputation. Any questions from committee members on the report? Okay, no. Motion to receive the. Oh, is Miguel? Miguel, are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you
hear me? Good morning, Miguel.
How are you? Good morning.
We're good, thank you. So you would like to make a deputation on the tenant complaints update?
And the following one, so it's two deputations in one today, regarding also the engagement process.
Okay, so so make your deputation on the tenant complaints, and then we'll receive it, and then we'll add you to the list for 7C.
Okay, sounds good. So I want to thank Catherine for raising important points on item 7.8, the previous item, and also Anne-Marie for bringing important questions. So basically, I submitted a video deputation of my last participation here at the Toronto Police Services Board, which I am right here. You can see the police officers on the background. Hey, hi, friends. Anyway, so I'm making my deputation because I believe we need to do better. And I ensure that my deputation lasts.
Miguel, we've lost you.
Sorry. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So my goal is that when residents complain about noise by law complaints, they are directed to municipal bylaw enforcement officers, because in my experience, it has been an angry process instead of seeking solutions. The complaint goes back to June 2023. My residents were not able to sleep at night. And that affects also.
Miguel, you're breaking up. Are you walking around, or are you? Can you stand still? Oh, now we've lost him. Okay. The beauty of technology. Okay. Sorry? Yeah.
So
there he is. Okay, Miguel, carry on.
All right. So, yeah, I'm sorry, technology.
Miguel, it's not, it doesn't seem to be working. We're gonna carry on, and
Well, I submitted anyway my deputation to the.
it's not working. Okay, it's not working. Okay, sorry, Miguel, it's not working. But I do have, Ziva, you have a question of the deputant? No, your hand is up. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on.
I do have a question overall, but not for the deputant.
Okay, well, so let's, this is a mess.
Sorry, Mr. Avila Velarde, we're having problems hearing from you. So I think we're going to move to Director Ferrara's question.
All right, so I'm just reading the report here. So they were saying that there were inconsistencies in notes and memos asked to tickets and service requests. And then you all created a standardized template for follow-ups to capture what exactly are the tenant complaints. So I guess my question is, what was the standard before, and how can we ensure that this new standard of capturing information has improved?
So through the chair, we typically would report back to the regions in terms of complaint trends. That information was shared quarterly, and what we found was having a bit more dynamic of a system with real-time ability to pull information up was more helpful. And so what we've established is a dashboard that gets updated monthly in an automated fashion. And so what the regions are able to do, and we had a demo and it works really well, can actually go in and see resolution rates, where things are at, how many unresolved complaints they have, how many complaints at a local site. So not only is the analysis able to be done by the centralized team, but this new data tool allows the regions to actually use it as a management tool. So I would say that those were the significant changes. Instead of quarterly reporting like this report, they now have a dashboard where they could actually pull up at an address level or a building level or a complaint type level, so that they could actually work with their teams to roll out local changes. So I would say that's the significant change on that.
And on a management level, so when management is supervising the dashboards, right, because everything is so technological now, are they also following up with the coordinators or the workers on outstanding tickets that have not been resolved?
So through the chair, that expectation is at the management level in the regions. So what the complaints team does is they investigate the complaints and send it back through to the regional team to follow up and do exactly what you're saying in terms of the accountability and ensuring that things are happening in the region. The complaints team does not get engaged with following up with staff in terms of their accountability and supervisory functions. That maintains with the regions, and that will continue, and the dashboard allows the manager to do exactly that. So we're able to say, okay, if there's a lot of problems at this site, for example, do we need an intervention with the full team? Is it complaints about a particular staff or potentially others? It allows us to actually work with the local management team to do exactly that.
And so if a tenant has a complaint, they go to the solutions team, to clarify.
If a tenant has a complaint, they're able to escalate through their local regional manager. Like I receive complaints directly at times. I know general managers, I'm not suggesting that's the channel, but I do. They can go to the supervisor of that particular staff. They could go to their manager, the general manager. So when we have a tenant event, for example, a tenant may come with a complaint. We then follow up with them directly. The complaints report before you is the centralized complaints team, which is a parallel system that allows you to complain, have that complaint documented, and that complaints team, and to the deputant's question around training, they're a specialized team of early resolution officers, and they're actually trained, and they're the ones that actually navigate the complaint with you through the system. So we have 5 resolution officers that actually work with you to actually address your complaint. So that's the difference between a centralized complaint versus a localized complaint, which happens every day. You're still able to escalate and work with the team's management. What we did find, we do have posters and different things kind of explaining who your managers are. What we heard from TAC and from other tenants directly is they wanted to customize who's the supervisor, who do I call? And so we've worked on a pamphlet that will be available at all of the hubs, so you know exactly who you need to escalate to. So that's something that we're going to add in addition to you recognizing or realizing what your general management team looks like. So if you have a complaint related to this item, you go to this particular supervisor. So that's a tool that we're hoping to have in place for next year, beginning of next year.
Nice. I like that there's information on the ground of where people could go if they have a complaint. I have, so the data that's here, so for table 1, top complaints, and then there's building maintenance, antisocial behaviors, and building services. Is this from the centralized or the local?
So
Like,
all
where's
of
this
the
data
data
being
presented before you is from the centralized team. So the localized complaints are not tracked through this process.
Okay. And how do we track them as a corporation? Like, how are we tracking the localized complaints?
So through the chair, great question. We do have, and I believe the deputant spoke to this as well. We do have a system through our homes technology. So that's our online system where we actually have staff notes and comments. And so, for example, if you call the call center and you say this wasn't done appropriately, we need you to follow up, the call center actually puts the notes into our home system. That then gets forwarded to a supervisor, and that supervisor is supposed to follow up with the local staff and then address the complaint that way. We have had escalations where you talk to the supervisor and then you want to escalate again, at which point you go to the manager or the general manager. So all of that is tracked in homes if the channels, the entry points are used to actually document it. So for example, if you complain, you know, at a tenant event to a random staff, that staff may directly connect you to the staff, that wouldn't be documented. But if you go through the formal channels, you go into your hub, you call the call center, the home system actually tracks that, and that allows us to assign that ticket to a non-frontline staff.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions from committee members? No? I have a question. So it shows that there are the year-to-date complaints. And are these all unique complaints, or could there be double counting? You know, you might have somebody that registers a complaint, you know, 3 days, 3 consecutive days.
So through the chair, they're unique complaints. However, they're not unique complainants. So we consider an issue resolved if we get it to closure on a particular issue. We have had instances where the issue comes back again.
Right.
That would be tracked as a separate complaint.
Okay, so if you get 5 complaints about an elevator broken down, that's registered as 5 complaints. Right, okay.
Yes.
Right, whereas it might only be, so building maintenance, the number is up, year-to-date number, well, I don't know if you don't have the comparison to a year ago, by the way. Now, I know you've got year-over-year change for September, but you don't have the year-to-date comparison to last year. But the numbers would be skewed anyway, because that included the whole corporation, and now it's only, you know, it's minus the seniors' buildings, I guess. But that only started, you know, a couple of months ago anyway, so. But it would be good to see the year-over-year comparison nonetheless.
So through the chair, we can add that column in to the next report.
Yeah, just so you know where you are year-to-date versus a year ago, even though the numbers are always going to be off a little bit because of the change. Okay, so 5 people complain about an elevator broken, which is probably not uncommon. You could get 20 complaints. I mean, could you get 20 complaints about an elevator being broken?
So through the chair, the complaints we receive at the centralized complaints team are typically not work orders. That would be more call center.
Oh, okay.
So for example, the elevator's broken, we may get multiple calls through our call center.
Right.
Complaints are typically about process, fairness.
Oh, okay.
I didn't receive this customer service or an issue of staff, so it's slightly different.
All right.
So we wouldn't necessarily have 5 complaints about the way a job was handled.
Right.
We would have a complaint that you didn't appreciate how this particular staff engaged with you on this job, or a vendor complaint. So those are typically what you would see in this area.
So on building maintenance, what would be an example of a complaint then?
So we called in because the sink was leaky. The staff came in, they were disrespectful, or my sink is still leaking. You didn't fix the problem, but when I called the call center, they said it was closed.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, motion to receive the report, please. One of the committee members. Thank you. Ziva, all in favor? Thank you. And the next item is the tenant engagement refresh. And that's the last item on the public agenda. And Anne Marie, you have a deputation?
Yes, so what I find is amazing and what is needed right now on page 305 when it talks about several different services when they did their surveys, food banks are so essential and important to communities. West End, my community, we're starting one because tenants are falling short. They're beginning the ending of the month, and they need within their own community food where they can access food to sustain themselves and their children, right? So it's so important that we get support in starting these food banks within our community because tenants are asking for them, and it's very hard because fridge and freezers are not normally something Toronto Community Housing approves when we go to the funding table to get money to purchase certain items, unless we make a special request and it does get approved. But I asked for them to focus on food security, supporting us in starting food banks in our community. The most important thing also is getting the major food organizations like Daily Bread, Second Harvest
Sorry,
to partner.
Mr. Chair, I just want the deputant to focus on tenant engagement. If she's
right.
coming to that.
Well, I'm focusing on page 305 where it talks about food security, food programs, food banks, child youth support, after school program, child care, employment, training, social programs for youth, health and wellness, fitness. That's the page I'm actually speaking to. And then I'm going to speak to community action table Q4 2023. It's a paragraph on page 303 is what I'm referring to. Those list of programs. Thank you. So just to say, just finishing off the first paragraph on page 305 is those are essential programs that need to be in Toronto Community Housing. Moving to the second paragraph, which would be community action table Q4 2023. I'm appreciating tenant reps in regards to their specialty service, giving support to community tenants, giving information back to Toronto Community Housing in regards to what services and the needs that are on the ground floor in our community. So awarding and paying recognition to us is good, but the process that some communities did not understand was how do tenants or tenants group get elected or nominated for this process was unclear to us when we were asking questions. We didn't get feedback in regards to how that is done, how we could be elected. I would love some clarity on that. And yeah, refresh, it's just a matter of, again, just supplying us with some type of appreciation. Honorariums are important. I'll reiterate that again, because, as we know, we're living in hard times. Transportation, there's just everything going on that's complicated. So support on any level is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Any questions of the deputant? Okay. Okay. Yep.
Mr. Avila, I think you're back with us. I'm going to suggest you keep your camera off because that may improve our ability to hear you. But if I understood you wanted to depute on this matter as well.
Hear me?
We can hear you. If you want, you've got 5 minutes for your deputation.
Okay, thanks. If I hear police headquarters really bad. So I'm multitasking. Also, I'm here speaking on the police budget. Well, my previous comments, which were cut off by technology, were in reference to the complaints update. But now we are moving forward to the tenant engagement process. So I have two questions. Somebody perhaps in this committee will ask that question, but I remember hearing Mr. Rigors saying that he's currently updating the tenant roles and responsibilities of the tenant rep and also the code of conduct. So any update on that and that updates for consultation, or people are going to be consulted?
Sure. Thank you, Miguel, for the.
Mr. Avila.
Refresh that.
You know, we don't normally.
But I want to.
Mr. Avila, you should, I think the clarification that the chair provided earlier, that deputation is an opportunity for you to share your opinion or views on a particular matter on the agenda. We typically don't receive questions from deputants for staff in the deputation process. Directors, as the chair pointed out, can take up a question that you want to have an answer to if they wish.
Yes, so my comments are directed to the TCHC member directors who perhaps can speak for me, since they are listening to me. And you heard also from Catherine and Anne-Marie. I think our questions are legitimate, and hopefully someone will have the courage to ask those questions to staff. That concludes my deputation of today. And as I told you, I sent my video deputation earlier, so maybe you guys can watch it later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Any questions of the deputant? Miguel, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Miguel, let me ask you, what in particular about the tenant engagement refresh, the tenant engagement process, what is it in particular you need to know?
If there's currently in any way an update on the tenant rep responsibilities and roles, and the code of conduct, those two policies.
Okay.
Are they being reviewed as we speak?
Okay.
And thank you for asking the question.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you, Miguel. And on the item, questions of staff from committee members? No? I'll ask Miguel's question. Oh, sorry, Ziva?
This is to the staff, not to Miguel.
Right.
Oh, okay.
That's what
all
we
right.
want. Yeah, that's the way it works.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a question in regards to the community action table. And it says the community action table brings together diverse groups of stakeholders who collaborate closely with tenant staff and partners. I know that some communities already have some form of tables, but and some of them are run with the City of Toronto. So we do have the community development office that's a part of some of these tables, and there's cluster groups as well, and then there's tables established where everyone, so all stakeholders including community residents, are involved in that matter. I guess my question to you is, would TCHC be able to help with funding some of these tables? And it goes beyond like sharing information and resources, building community of practice and capacity building for community representatives. Would they be up for also pitching in money to help with funding some of the existing tables that they already have limited resources?
So through the chair, at this point, we do not have funding that we would apply to groups that you referenced. We do have the Tenant Action Fund, which is typically for smaller sort of localized community tenant-led projects. We don't have funding to support capacity building or coordination of the nature you're speaking to. Historically, we did have something called the Social Investment Fund that would fund programs like that and projects like that. But I think that went away, I want to say, at least 7 years ago. ago now, and so obviously it becomes a budgetary discussion that we could have with the board in terms of other avenues to fund these types of programs. I think there is an openness and a willingness in terms of how we more progressively support local initiatives. I just think it's a matter of funding priorities and budgeting, but right now, no.
Marcel, question?
Yes, okay, so if you can't really, there's not really much in the budget to fund these initiatives. I heard somewhere, and I can't remember where, but is it possible for TCHC to do a letter on behalf or in partnership with whatever group that is trying to start some kind of program like for food securities, so that they could actually take it out to like grocery stores or food chains and whatnot?
So
Is that possible?
Through the chair, we do write letters of support, both to agencies that are applying for funding to work in our communities, but as well to tenant groups, typically not necessarily to the local grocery store, but I don't think it's something that we wouldn't do. I think it's something that we would take on a case-by-case basis. So through our programs and partnerships team led by Arsema Barhane, we could absolutely look into offering individualized letters. We do that now with agencies, not so much to the private sector, but I do think it's something that we would be open to considering.
Anything further on this item?
Yeah, I just have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
So I know that one of the deputants did raise honorariums if we do decide, hold on for one moment. Sorry, I'm just, I'm at work. Sorry about that. So can we provide honorariums to people like tenants who are volunteering for, I see over here, the tenant engagement system. Oh, it's a volunteer policy. Never mind. Okay, never mind.
So through the chair, at this time, we do not provide honorariums to participants in the tenant engagement system. That is one area that is one of the items recommended for review in the tenant engagement system review. And so we will bring forward a recommendation related to that in an upcoming TSC meeting when we bring the review.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
It's just a comment because really, overall, it's for the whole board, how we spend our money. So I'm going to go back to the hubs again and waiting for that really clear financial report on the hubs as far as the cost for operating, the cost of building. That simply went ahead. So the priorities are ones that should be set by the board, and I don't think the hubs were. So everybody knows that I am on a little whatever on the hubs, and as perhaps not as thoughtful a way as spending as possible. I'm hoping that the tenant advisory committee, that big changes like that would go through that tenant advisory committee, because at that point, that's a priority spend. That was for tenants, but is that really going to work? And it's costing us a lot of money. So I could just be really sad and sick about the hubs. And so I just want to say, Ziva, you weren't here, and the deputants, that went flying off in that direction. And now look what we've got to deal with. So priorities and spending, and our Ernst & Young, we're coming in with the financial review. I don't think we'll be making any decisions outside of looking at that Ernst & Young review and what they're telling us they found, what our options and directions should be. And then we have to figure out how we fix some of these very unfortunate directions that we were, violence reduction program, so much money, the hubs, all these different things that were dropped in that are causing some issues, at least in my mind. So I just wanted to say that, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else on the tenant engagement refresh? No? Okay, motion to receive, please. Moved by Marcel, all in favor? Thank you. That concludes the public portion of the agenda. So we'll ask for a motion to adjourn, and then we'll pause for 5 minutes, and motion to adjourn. All in favor? We'll pause for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back with a very brief in-camera session. All right, thank you.